What's the difference between a wash and a glaze? In this video, I'll explain the difference and show you how to paint washes and glazes with watercolor. Washes are essential for painting large areas and watercolor backgrounds. Glazing is how you layer in watercolor. This is part of my Watercolor for Beginners series. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss upcoming videos. In my last video, I covered 7 basic techniques every watercolor beginner needs to learn. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend watching that video first, then coming back to this one. In this video, we're going to talk about washes and glazes. So technically, a wash is when you paint the first layer on your paper, and a glaze is when you paint a layer over another layer that has already dried. So let's look at some washes and glazing techniques. The first thing I want to show you is how to paint a flat wash or a graded wash on dry paper. So one thing that is very important when doing this is to make sure you have enough paint already mixed up to cover your entire area, the entire shape. So if you're doing the entire background, you're going to need to mix a lot of paint ahead of time to make sure that you do not run out of paint in the middle of painting your wash. If you do that, you're going to ruin your wash. The second thing to know when painting on dry is that we want to use gravity to help us. So I'm going to take this tape roll and prop up my sketchbook here so that it is tilted on an angle. It doesn't have to be much for this to work, just the tape roll is plenty for me, and you're going to see how that helps us here in a second. So I've loaded my brush with paint, and I'm not going to wipe any of that paint off. I want this nice and wet. And I'm just going to paint a row across here. And you see that bead forming on the bottom of the paint. And that's what is going to help us pull this paint down the page without getting back runs or a hard line where the paint ends. So you need that bead of paint. You need it wet enough to form that bead and use gravity to help you carry the pigment down the paper. And one thing you don't want to do is ever go back up. So I'm not going to use my brush back up here. I need to just keep working down. If you think your wash is going to be too light, you need to just finish the wash, let it dry completely, and then you can do another layer on top of it. So now this is a flat wash. If I rinse out my brush and just have clean water on my brush, we can turn this into a graded wash. So now I'm carrying that bead down the paper, but I'm doing it just with clear water on my brush. And you have to keep rinsing your brush because that pigment is coming down with it. Now, when you get to the bottom of this, you still have that bead there. You want to dry off your brush and you want to suck that up, that bead. Or if you had tape at the bottom of your paper, you're going to want to run your damp brush along there to suck that up. Otherwise, it could run back in or dry with some unsightly blooms. All right, so that is a wash on dry. Now, what if you wanted to do a flat wash like that, but around a shape that you've painted? So say you want to add a background to this. Then I'm going to show you some tricks to do that. So I'm going to keep working with my 1/2 inch flat brush here. You can do this with any brush. I'm just comfortable with this brush. You may prefer to do it with a round brush. Just make sure your brush is large enough to cover the area without stopping and working back too much. So you definitely Don't want to do it with this kind of brush. Okay, again, I'm going to make sure I have enough paint mixed up for my entire area. So I'm just mixing a little bit more here before I start. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing. We've got the tape here under the sketchbook. Using gravity is still going to be key here because, again, we're painting on dry paper. The paint is only going to go where our brush does, and we are going to control the paint using gravity. So starting the same way as I did on the top, got my brush loaded up, and I'm getting that nice bead of paint forming at the bottom of my stroke. We want to keep that going, so every time I'm reloading my brush. Now, as I come around the shape, I'm going to be careful here. Already got a spot on my leaf. Okay. And I'm going to carefully go around the tip of that leaf, trying not to go too far back up into my paint where it's already starting to dry. Now we want to make sure this bead here stays wet so we can work on this. So keeping that wet bead all along. And I see that it's kind of not as wet here in the middle, so I'm going to work on this area first. And those other two sides can just hang there with a wet bead while I go around this leaf. And I probably could have done this with a smaller brush to be neater. But as long as you have that bead there, you have time to work, so you don't really have to rush too much. Now, as I come down, I dried off my brush because I don't want a bunch of excess paint. I don't need the bead anymore as I work down into this area. That's why I blotted off my brush. Okay. And now I'm just going to suck up that excess there. And now these beads are still hanging there. They're still workable. So we can come back up and start working them down the page. Now you don't want to leave them too long because you're going to see the pigment settling there. So I'm going to leave that one for a second and work on this one so it doesn't stay up here too long. So the key is to just keep that bead running down the page as you go around your shapes. So again, I like this brush, but you probably want to use a smaller round brush for this so that you could be more precise. I'm just trying not to take up a lot of your time here. So I'm working kind of fast. But that's okay. This isn't the method that I tend to use. The other one I'm going to show you wet on wet is the one that I prefer because you have a lot more control and you have a lot more time to work and you don't have to worry about keeping the bead of paint. All right, getting down to the bottom here, I'm going to leave that bead in that corner because I need to come around here, around this leaf, and carry this bead down under here. And once I get down there, I can join those two up to finish this off. Okay, you can see I was kind of sloppy on my leaf edges here. This brush might be a little too big. All right, again, I'm sucking up that bottom edge so I don't get darker pigment forming there. You can see where we left those beads hanging, you get more pigment settling there, but we didn't get any blooms or backruns or anything like that as we carried down the page. And this part is already dry here, that's why it looks quite a bit lighter. This should even out more. But again, this is not my preferred method because as you can see, it requires a lot of control and a lot of patience. I think there's an easier way, and we're going to look at that in a second. So what I want to show you next is doing a wash on wet. Now you can do a flat color or a graded wash on wet, but it's also really great for mixing colors. So I have my clean bowl of water here, and I'm just wetting this area. So I'm painting the paper with clear water. And for this one, we do not need it on an angle at all. We don't want that, actually. We prefer our paper to stay flat. Okay. So I've got that wet, and I'm just looking at my paper on an angle to make sure I don't have any puddles. Now, if I was working on a larger painting, I would wet this 2 or 3 times to let it really soak in the paper, but I don't need to do that for this small of an area. So now that that's wet, I can apply my blue, and you see, I don't need a bead. It's the water's helping that paint spread. And as long as this is wet, it's going to help me cover the paper evenly. And I can even go back up in here. It doesn't matter because it's not drying yet like it was on this one. And now I want to add in a different color. So we can add in some green, and I'm coming up from the bottom. Doesn't matter which way you work when you're working on wet paper. I do have too much water here, so I'm going to dry my brush and suck that up. And I can even go up into this blue if I want these 2 colors to blend more. I can add more blue in here. This is why I love working wet on wet, because you have a lot more time to play with it and get the blend that you want. So I have a whole video on doing these types of gradient washes, so you can check that out if you like this technique. So I told you there's a way to do this that gives you a lot more control, and that's using wet on wet to wet the area around your shape before you start applying color so that you can take your time and be more precise going around the shapes, because when you first do it, you're just doing it with clean water. But also it'll allow you to do some cool things with color too. So let's look at that. If you think this video is helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel for more watercolor tutorials. I have rinsed off my brush. Might not be perfect, but it's gonna work. So, oh, yep, I still have some blue in there. Okay, doesn't matter because we're gonna add color. The key here is to only paint the water on the background, not on the leaves. So it's kind of like doing the flat wash, but just with clean water. And I'm not even gonna get right up to the leaves. I'm gonna leave a small gap, and I'll show you how we'll close that off once we're adding color. So you just wanna paint the clean water around your shapes, and you don't have to touch the edge of the shape. Just go as close as you can. You can leave a tiny white gap, and you can probably see where I'm applying my water because I have a little bit of blue still on my brush. Okay, so go all the way around the leaves like that. Now it's already going to be drying up here because it took me a while to do that. So I'm going to apply another layer of water, which is going to be quicker and easier to apply because we already have some wetness on the paper. And I'm going to work my way around these leaves again with that clear water. Ultimately, we just want nice, evenly wet paper around our shape. you can tilt your paper and take a look at it, make sure it's nice, evenly glossy everywhere. See that you've gotten close enough to your shapes. Again, you don't have to touch them exactly. All right. This is looking pretty good. Now we can start adding in our colors. I'm going to switch to my round brush. We're going to do more of a mottled background with different colors. So I'm just sprinkling them all around the background, and the wet paper is going to help them spread. They're not going to go onto our leaves because we didn't add water there. So the paint is only going to go where we added the water. You do have to still work a little quick, but you have more time than you do with the flat wash on dry paper. When your paper is wet, you have more time to play with it. So now I'm going to get in here, and you can see it's stopping before my shape because I didn't take the water all the way up to the edge. So now I can actually use my brush and I can pull that in right up to the edge of the shape. See that? And you can do this with one solid color too, so you can get the same look, but with more control and more time to apply the paint and to refine these edges. That's the thing with the flat wash on dry, is you don't really have time to fiddle with the edges like this. But on wet, you can work back into the other areas, and it's okay as long as your paper stays wet. If it starts drying anywhere, that's where you get into trouble. But that's why I'm working around the entire paper. Making sure none of these edges or these really small areas start to dry. Okay, I just have this last one on the bottom to tighten up the edges. And you can see I'm able to work on this so much longer than I was. This is all still wet. It's dried a little bit on this edge, but all of this area around my shape is still wet. And so I am able to keep working on this. I can even add some more colors to this, which we'll do that here in a second. So I can even add some darker spots of color if I want to blend that in. Because this is still wet, I'm able to keep adding pigment to this. I'm going to spread this out a little bit. And as long as you've kept it wet, you can keep adding more paint. I wouldn't add paint that is too watery. At this stage, you want to be adding thicker paints. So less water, more pigment as you keep working into this wet paper. Okay. I think that is enough for that example. I'm going to let that dry. It does take a lot longer to dry, but you had a lot more time to work on it than you did with the flat wash. Now I want to talk about glazing. So glazing is just adding another wash to your painting, but specifically you're glazing one color over another. So I painted these leaves earlier. They're already completely dry, and now I can glaze another color on top of this layer. So with glazing, you can do it on dry. So these leaves are dry. I'm going to grab my paint and just paint directly on top of the dry leaf. And I'm using the same color here. And because watercolor is transparent, you're going to see some of the color from below coming through. And when I glaze the same color on top, this side of the leaf is going to be darker. Now you can also glaze with a different color on top of the green. So here I'm going to grab some blue, and on this one, I'm going to paint blue on top of the green. And you're going to see the blue looks different than it does over here because the green is showing through. You see that green glowing through underneath that blue. So that's one of the beautiful things about glazing. You can also glaze. I'm going to grab some pink here and show you what happens if I glaze pink over green. So these are complementary. You can tell that it's pink, but you can see the green glowing through the pink. So that's glazing on dry. Now you can also use glazing with a wet on wet technique if you don't want these hard edges. So first, I rinsed off my brush and I'm going to take clean water and I'm going to re-wet this entire leaf. All I'm doing is painting clean water on it because I want to use a wet on wet technique to add pigment. I'll use that charging technique that I showed in my last video. So I've got that evenly wet, no puddles. And now I can take my pigment and paint it onto that wet area. And it's going to spread within that leaf wherever I applied the water. Now where the water stops, like at the bottom of this leaf, because I didn't paint onto the stem, the pigment's going to spread there and you're going to get a hard edge. So now we can do kind of what we did up here with the half leaf. So I can just wet half of the leaf. This is a cool way to make shadows on leaves. So I'm just wetting half of it, and then I'm going to take my paint and only add it along that top edge. And it's going to bleed down into the area that we wet. This one, I'm going to wet the whole leaf and show you that you can do this same technique where you can add multiple colors on top of the same leaf. So I've got that wet, and I'm going to grab some yellow. And I can drop yellow on here. I can grab pink and I can drop that on there. And just like I did here, I can paint wet on wet and keep adding pigment as long as this leaf is wet. So maybe we want to add some blue at the tip. So that's how you can glaze using wet on wet techniques. And just like up here, if I had added the green to these wet on wet areas, it would end up as a darker shade of green because I'm glazing it on top of another layer. So that was a quick crash course on washes and glazing. So first we looked at painting a wash on dry paper by tilting our paper and keeping that nice wet bead as we move the paint down the paper. Then I showed you how to do a flat wash around a shape, again, controlling the water with gravity and that wet bead. Then we looked at doing a wash on wet paper. So with wet paper, you can blend colors together and you have a lot more time to work. You can also do wet on wet around a shape. This gives you more time to work on your background and you can add different colors and play with that. Then we looked at glazing on dry. So this first layer of the leaf was dry and we applied another layer of paint on dry paper. Then we looked at glazing using a wet on wet technique. So the initial leaves were dry, then we came back, wet the leaves again with clear water, and then added additional pigment to glaze another layer on top of the leaves. I hope this introduction to watercolor washes and glazes was helpful. If there are other watercolor techniques you'd like me to cover in an upcoming video, please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss upcoming tutorials.